The sky had forgotten how to be blue. Thick gray clouds choked out the sun, and the land below looked just as dead as the world that once thrived on it. Cracked highways bled into overgrown fields. Gas stations stood like skeletons with their ribs torn out. Cities were nothing but craters filled with silence, bones, and memories. But in the middle of this ruined earth, there was a zone, a stretch of land that hadn't been completely lost to the undead. It wasn't marked on any government map. It had no borders, no welcome signs. Survivors called it the last safe dead zone. And tonight, 100 people had crossed into its shadow. Among them was Ivy Marlowe, a former EMT with a haunted stare and blood still crusted under her nails. She'd pulled 12 people out of a burning outpost 2 weeks ago and hadn't slept much since. She moved like a ghost, scanning the treeline as the caravan of battered vehicles came to a grinding halt near the ridge. Behind her, Commander Rourke, once a colonel in the National Guard, climbed out of the lead truck. His jaw was set like stone, his eyes sweeping the horizon. A quiet tension hummed in the air. This wasn't safety, not yet. It was just the absence of death, and everyone knew that absence could be temporary. "Engines off," Rourke called quietly. Everyone out. Quiet and fast. Doors clicked open. Survivors poured out, families clutching each other, fighters holding rusted weapons, kids with wide eyes that had seen far too much. 100 souls in total. Not one untouched by loss. A younger man with oil-slicked hands, Theo, pointed toward the valley below. "That's the safe zone?" he asked. "Looks like the rest of the world to me." "It's not about what it looks like," Ivy answered. "It's about what's not there." There were no smoldering ruins. No ash in the air. No screams in the wind. That was the miracle. But miracles came with warnings. Rourke held up a folded, weather-worn map. This was drawn by the last recon team that made it through. No main roads, no trails. "We move through this place by instinct and luck. If you see something moving that shouldn't be, don't shout. Don't shoot unless ordered. And whatever you do, don't go alone." They were standing on the edge of a place forgotten by time, where no formal rescue teams ever returned and the undead didn't roam in swarms, but did, on occasion, watch. The survivors moved carefully down into the valley, their feet sinking into thick, moist soil. Ivy kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to hear a distant snarl or the telltale groan of something waking up. But the forest was still. Too still. They followed a half-collapsed power line deeper in. It twisted like a rusted serpent through the trees, leading them toward a crumbling ranger station that would serve as their temporary camp. Along the way they passed abandoned tents, broken wagons, and a ruined drone caught in a pine branch, its camera still blinking red. At the station, Rourke divided them into shifts. Guard rotations. Water scouts. Food recovery. No one argued. Everyone knew the cost of hesitation. Night fell quickly. Ivy sat by a makeshift fire, sharpening her blade and listening to the wind. That's when the old man, Grant, a retired cartographer, sat beside her. He unfolded a leather journal filled with hand-drawn sketches of terrain and whispered, "You know, maps weren't made for places like this." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "This place doesn't want to be mapped. Everything changes. Trees move. Rivers dry up. Markers vanish. I drew this line 4 days ago." He tapped one of the pages. "Now there's a cliff where it used to be flat. That's not possible." "I know," he whispered. "And yet here we are." Suddenly, a panicked shout cut through the quiet. "Over here." Everyone ran. A scout, blood dripping from his arm, stumbled into the clearing. There in the trees. Not the zombies. Something else. I saw eyes." Rourke drew his rifle. "Eyes? What kind of eyes?" They blinked. But they didn't belong to anything human. The silence returned, louder than before. The survivors had arrived in the last safe dead zone on Earth. But as they huddled together in the dark, it became clear, this place wasn't empty. It was just waiting. And no roads led out. The firelight flickered, casting nervous shadows against the ranger station walls. Every pair of eyes turned to the injured scout, his face pale and trembling. Blood ran in a thin stream down his forearm, soaking the torn sleeve of his jacket. But it wasn't the wound that held their attention. It was the fear in his voice. "I saw it," he said, gripping his own wrist tightly. "Whatever it was, it didn't move like a zombie. It crouched like it was waiting. Watching me." Commander Rourke knelt down beside him, eyes narrowed. "You sure it wasn't one of the infected?" The scout shook his head violently. "Too fast. Too quiet. I felt it in the trees. Something was hunting." Ivy stood nearby, silent but alert. She believed him. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. She had seen people lie. This wasn't a lie. Rourke signaled 2 guards to scan the perimeter. Nobody wanders alone. We double watches. Grant, stay close to me. Ivy, you're on perimeter with Theo and Lena. Theo, who had been fiddling with an old military radio, looked up. This place is supposed to be dead. No signal. No movement. Just geography. But if what he saw was real, then maybe we're not alone in this zone after all. Great, muttered Lena, cocking her crossbow. So we either get eaten by the dead or stalked by ghosts. Don't joke, Ivy said flatly. Fear makes mistakes. They split into pairs and spread out across the station's border, just 50 yards in any direction, close enough to shout, far enough to buy time if something came. The forest surrounding them was dense. The trees grew too close together, and the branches clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. Every now and then the wind would whistle low, like it was carrying secrets. Ivy crouched behind a rotted log, her eyes locked on a dark patch between the trees. Her breathing was steady. Years of surviving the undead had taught her how to listen, to hear danger in the smallest twitch of sound. A twig snapped. Behind her. She spun, knife raised. It was Theo. Easy, he hissed. Didn't mean to sneak up. Just wanted to show you something. He handed her a small handheld device, an old directional microphone rigged with a power pack. He flicked it on and a low hiss filled the silence. Listen to this, he whispered. The hiss continued. Then, something else. A whisper. Faint. Garbled. But real. Help, no way they're still in. The voice faded. The wind took it. Ivy stared at the mic, then at Theo. That's not a radio frequency. He nodded. That's ambient sound. Something is either broadcasting nearby or something in this zone is repeating voices. Echoes. Or bait. Neither of them liked that theory. Back at camp, Lena spotted movement in the treetops. She aimed her crossbow, steady and quiet. But what she saw made her hesitate. Reflective and high up, like a predator. But too round. Too aware. She stepped backward, eyes still locked. Then the thing vanished. Not with a jump. Not with a leap. It simply wasn't there anymore. By morning no one had slept. The forest felt closer than before. The line between safe and unsafe blurred with every passing hour. Rourke stood in front of the survivors, his voice low but calm. We've made it this far. But this zone isn't what we thought. It's not just undead we're avoiding, it's something else. Something older. Or smarter. We don't engage unless necessary. We hold our ground and map the terrain 1 mile at a time. Someone from the crowd, a woman named Kira, spoke up. What if there's no map for this place? What if we're not supposed to leave? Rourke didn't answer. Ivy looked at Grant. The old cartographer clutched his journal like a lifeline. The trees moved again, he said softly. A ridge that wasn't there yesterday now blocks the northern route. Either we're going in circles or this place is folding in on us. And then came the worst sound of all. Silence. Not even birds. No wind. No footsteps. Just silence, like the world was holding its breath. Then from the forest edge something stepped into view. It looked human. Moved human. But its skin was like cracked stone, its face stretched too tightly across its skull. And its eyes. Those same round, aware eyes. It didn't growl. Didn't charge. Just watched. And then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the forest. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message was clear. They weren't alone. And the forest didn't want them to leave. By dawn, a heavy fog had rolled in. It crept over the trees like a living thing, swallowing the ranger station and stretching long tendrils between tents and abandoned vehicles. The survivors moved through it in tight groups, voices hushed, heads on swivels. The world had gone soft and blurred, like something was hiding just out of sight. Ivy was the first to notice. Where's the North Patrol? She asked, voice tense. Rourke turned. They should have checked in at sunrise. They haven't. Theo, nearby, flipped through the frequency channels of the salvaged field radio. No signal. Not even static. Like their comms went dead all at once. That was the first bad sign. The second came 30 minutes later when a pair of scouts stumbled back into camp, alone, panicked and bloodied. We found Harper, one of them gasped, barely able to form the words. His body. But not all of it. Zombies? Rourke asked, already bracing for the answer. The scout shook her head. No. His rifle was still loaded. No bite marks. Just scratches. Like claws but thin. Too thin for anything human. And Harper was only the beginning. Within 2 hours, 3 more were missing. No sounds, no screams, no trails. Their tents were still zipped shut. Their weapons left behind. Someone or something was moving through the camp. Not like a horde but like a thief, precise and silent. By noon, the survivors were whispering words no one wanted to believe. Trap. Haunted. Cursed. Ivy stood on a crate in the center of the station yard, looking over the frightened faces. Panic will get us all killed, she said, trying to keep her voice strong. We don't know what's out there, but we know how to survive. We've done it before. A man called Blake spoke up from the back. That was when we knew the rules. Headshots, noise control, numbers. This thing? This isn't the undead. This is something else. Something smarter. What are you suggesting? Rourke asked. That we leave. No. Head south. Cut through whatever's left. No more maps. No more waiting to be picked off. But Grant, the cartographer, stepped forward. Leave and go where? Back to roads we already know are infested? Back to cities we've seen overrun? This zone might be dangerous, but it's possible. Out there? It's already lost. Theo looked between them, voice low. I recorded another whisper last night. I think it's using our voices now. Echoing things we've said. Why? Ivy asked. To confuse us. Make us think we're safe. Or maybe, he paused. Maybe it wants to sound human. The camp grew quiet. Then a scream. Everyone turned toward the eastern tents, just in time to see Lena dragging a small boy out from behind a rusted vehicle. He was shaking violently, blood on his shirt, eyes wide with terror. It was my sister, he cried. She came to me. Said she found Mom. Where's your sister now? Ivy asked, kneeling beside him. He pointed, trembling. I followed her into the trees. But it wasn't her. Her eyes were wrong. She smiled too wide. A chill ran through the group. Something wasn't just watching them, it was learning them. Studying their words, their faces, their fears. Imitating them. Rourke made a call. We fortify the camp. No one walks alone. Every tent gets a buddy system. And if you see something familiar that shouldn't be there, don't follow it. That night, guards stood in pairs. Fires were spaced wider to keep away shadows. Ivy stayed awake with Theo, watching the edge of the woods. Still think this zone is worth it? Theo asked, eyes scanning the dark. We're alive, Ivy said. That's worth something. Then she noticed something. Movement at the far tree line. A figure standing still. Tall. Thin. Unmoving. Ivy raised her binoculars. Her heart nearly stopped. It was her. Standing in the woods. Same jacket. Same scar across the brow. Same eyes. I seek me, she whispered. Theo looked. What? Ivy blinked, and the figure was gone. Not vanished. Just blended into the trees. She stepped back, shaken. This thing doesn't just kill. It copies. It gets closer every time. Grant's voice came from behind them, hoarse and dry. I think it's mapping us. What? Ivy turned. It draws lines in silence. Figures out who matters. Who leads. Who protects. Then it removes pieces, like a game. A scream rang out from the opposite side of camp. Rourke and 2 others ran toward the sound. They arrived just in time to find a torn sleeping bag and a message scratched into the ground with a blood-soaked fingertip. Not a place. A trap. The message in the dirt was still fresh when the wind picked up. Not a place. A trap. The words echoed in Ivy's mind as she stood over the blood-stained patch of earth. They had thought the last safe dead zone might be salvation. But it was no sanctuary. It was a snare, carefully laid, perfectly silent, and terrifyingly intelligent. Rourke barked orders, trying to reassert control. We pull in the perimeter. Fortify the station building. That thing is testing us. But we don't break. We hold. But even he knew, something had changed. The survivors were no longer trying to find their way through this zone. They were trying to avoid being erased inside it. Theo, dragging cables toward the comms tent, glanced over his shoulder constantly. This whole zone, it's like it remembers where we've been. The forest doesn't regrow where we step, it reacts. I marked a tree yesterday, it moved. The mark was 10 feet higher today. Trees don't move, Lena muttered, tightening her grip on the crossbow. Neither do dead bodies after 2 days, Theo shot back. But here we are. Inside the ranger station, Grant unfurled his journal again, flipping to the older maps. We can't go forward. Every route I've charted closes within hours. Canyons shift. Trails vanish. Whatever's out there is changing the terrain, Or we're being herded. Ivy leaned over his shoulder. Herded? Where? That's the thing, he whispered. We haven't been circling. We've been funneling. Every missing scout? Every noise? It's been pushing us in one direction. South by southeast. There's something waiting there. Night fell again like a slow curtain, thick, oppressive, endless. That evening, Rourke ordered motion detectors and floodlights set up around the main station. The survivors huddled in smaller groups, some whispering prayers, others clinging to weapons. No one was alone. Then came the scratching. It started just past midnight. Oh, rhythmic. Like fingernails against bark. It came from the east side of the station just beyond the light. Ivy, Theo, and Lena moved toward it slowly, weapons drawn. The forest wall stood still, until they saw the shape. It wasn't moving. It was mimicking stillness. Tall, stretched limbs. Eyes too wide. A mouth not quite shaped right, held open in silence. It wore clothing, a shredded jacket that once belonged to one of the missing. Theo slowly raised his mic and hit record. The thing tilted its head. Then in Ivy's own voice it spoke. I'm not afraid anymore. They didn't wait. Ivy fired. Lena loosed a bolt. Theo triggered the floodlight. But the figure was gone before any of it landed. In its place, the trees shook gently, almost in laughter. Rourke arrived moments later. Same figure. Same face, Ivy said. My. It's not just watching, it's building something. A version of us. Maybe many. They're learning, Lena said. Studying us. Breaking us down. The following morning brought more loss. 3 more missing. No sounds. No struggle. But something new was left behind. A trail. Thin strings of cloth tied to branches. Small piles of stones arranged in patterns. It was either a warning or an invitation. Grant studied the arrangement. They're directional. Almost like ancient waymarkers. Old tribes used to do this when crossing unfamiliar land. Is it guiding us to something? Ivy asked. Or guiding something to us? Grant replied. Despite fear, the team decided to follow the trail. 5 of them. Ivy, Rourke, Lena, Theo, and Grant. They moved carefully, marking every turn, checking every shadow. The string led deeper into a grove where sunlight barely touched the ground. Then they found it. An opening in the rock face. Unnatural, jagged, like something had torn its way into the mountain rather than carved it. Bones littered the entrance. Some fresh. Some decades old. This is where it ends, Rourke said. No, Ivy whispered. This is where it begins. The air changed inside. Cold. Metallic. Like breathing through rust. They stepped inside, just far enough to see what was beyond the entrance. Chambers. Carved walls. Dozens of humanoid shapes standing motionless. Not dead. Not alive. Copies. Ivy stepped closer to one. It had her face but wrong. The eyes were lifeless. The expression frozen in confusion. She stepped back quickly. They're building something here, Theo said, his voice cracking. These are molds. They're copying us. Planning. From the back of the chamber, something stirred. A sound like stretching skin and breaking twigs. We need to go, Lena whispered. But the exit wasn't behind them anymore. The path they entered through had sealed. The forest, remembered. And now it was watching from within. The air in the cavern thickened with every breath. Ivy pressed her back to the wall, her fingers curled tight around the handle of her knife. The entrance behind them was gone, swallowed by shifting stone and root. The tunnel had rearranged itself. They closed us in, Theo whispered, his voice barely a thread. Just like the patrols. Just like the others. Rourke moved forward slowly, scanning the rows of humanoid figures that stood frozen in the dim orange light cast by Theo's modified torch. The resemblance was unmistakable. Dozens of faceless forms, each shaped like someone from the camp. Look at the hands, Grant muttered, stepping toward a nearby figure. They're etched with small scars. That's Blake's hand. I gave him those sutures myself when he sliced it open on a fence. Lena's voice broke the silence. So these aren't just copies, they're practice. It wasn't just mimicry. It was something worse, something ancient, patient, and precise. A thing learning humanity by trial and terror. Farther inside the chamber, the figures grew less formed. Broken limbs. Extra joints. Eyes placed too far apart or mouths stretched into wrong angles. Failed attempts. But even the failures stood still. Waiting. Ivy's heartbeat pounded in her ears. They've been watching people for a long time. Grant nodded grimly. Some of these clothes, they're from another era. One of them's wearing a government uniform. Pre-fall. This didn't start with us. And it's not ending with us either, Rourke growled. We find another way out. Whatever this thing is, it's not God. It bleeds. It hides. It fears discovery. That's why it's keeping its secrets buried underground. But then they heard it. A low guttural hum. Not mechanical. Not alive. Resonant. It vibrated through the floor and into their bones. From the far end of the cavern, shapes began to move. Not walk. Not run. Just shift, like fog thickening in the air. Theo swung his light wide and it flickered. The beam stuttered, then cut out. Darkness. Total. Ivy? Lena's voice cut through the black. I'm here, Ivy replied. Don't move. Just stay together. But the hum grew louder, almost like a voice, layered and distorted. And then came the whispers. Not words. Not phrases. Feelings. Regret. Anger. Grief. A flood of emotion stolen from the people they had lost. From the ones who had disappeared. The creature, whatever it was, hadn't just taken bodies. It had taken memories. Grant staggered forward, holding his head. It's showing me my daughter. I can see her. She's smiling. Talking. That's not her. Ivy shouted. Fight it. It's trying to weaken us. Lena fired a bolt blindly into the dark. A hiss answered. Sharp and unnatural. Movement followed. Ivy lunged forward, grabbing Theo's shoulder. Run. They bolted down the narrow tunnel ahead, ducking between broken columns and half-finished copies. Behind them, the hum grew into a scream, a chorus of stolen voices. Theo stumbled. Ivy caught him. Grant led the way now, somehow finding a winding slope upward. This way. There's light, faint but it's there. Lena brought up the rear, turning once to see something following. She couldn't describe it. A shadow in the wrong shape crawling across both floor and wall. They burst through a narrow gap in the rock, Grant practically dragging Theo by the arm, and collapsed into a clearing. Daylight. Blinding. Real. They gasped for air like drowning victims reaching the surface. But something was wrong. The clearing was quiet. No wind. No wildlife. Even the trees around it looked wrong, too perfect, evenly spaced and watching. We're not out, Ivy whispered. Grant spun slowly, looking at the identical trunks, the identical leaves. We've been relocated. We didn't escape. We were moved. Theo's voice trembled. Like a rat in a maze. It let us go, to see what we'd do next. Rourke cursed under his breath. No. We're not mice. We're human. And that means we fight. We burn this place to the ground if we have to. Lena didn't speak. She just pointed. Across the clearing stood a lone figure. Rourke. But Rourke was already with them. The second Rourke tilted his head and smiled. A perfect copy. Until it opened its mouth, and dozens of voices spilled out at once. Young. Male. Female. All wrong. Your choices brought you here, it said. Your fear feeds the path. You were never survivors. You were study. Ivy raised her blade. We're not yours. Not now. Not ever. The thing didn't flinch. It only stepped back, and vanished into the trees. The imposter Rourke was gone, but its voice lingered, clinging to the air like smoke that wouldn't lift. Theo sat on the edge of the clearing, face buried in his hands. How does something know us that well? It doesn't just copy bodies, it mimics our minds, our emotions, our memories. It's not a creature, Grant said, pacing the line of trees. It's a system. A living intelligence born from death and silence. It doesn't fight with teeth, it fights with fear. And confusion, Ivy added. It isolates us, imitates us, then uses what we trust against us. They needed answers, not more theories. And Ivy knew they wouldn't find them just standing in another perfect clearing. We move, Rourke said. We follow the sun. Always east. If it wants us stuck, we go straight. But the forest didn't like straight lines. It bent reality around them. For 2 hours they marched. Ivy carved lines into trees, dropped markers, whispered directions aloud. Still, they passed the same stump 4 times, saw the same patch of yellow moss 6. And then came the voices again. Not loud. Not threatening. Familiar. It started with Lena. She stopped mid-stride, head tilted, eyes wide. That's my father. I hear him. He's dead, Rourke said. I know, but it's his voice, he's calling my name. He used to say it that way when I was in trouble. Grant turned sharply. It's not real, Lena. It's bait. You've seen what it does. But the voice kept repeating, Lena, please. Come here. Come home. Then Ivy heard it too, her mother. Soft and kind. Ivy, it's safe now. You're almost there. She froze. Her mother had died during the first outbreak. Ivy hadn't heard that voice in 7 years. But now it flowed around her like wind through leaves. Grant pulled her back. It's all lies, Ivy. It's testing our will. She blinked hard. Then we test back. They formed a ring. Backs together. Eyes outward. And Ivy did something she hadn't done since the world ended. She began to hum. A slow, steady melody from childhood. Something real. Theo joined her. Then Lena. Then Grant. The voices tried to drown them, but couldn't. Rourke yelled into the forest, "You want to study us? Then see this, we remember what's real. Not what you build." For the first time since entering the zone, the whispers faded. The air lightened. The forest grew quiet again, but not dead quiet. Normal. Ivy looked around. The trail ahead was new. Not shaped by fear but real terrain, rocks, uneven dirt, broken branches. Natural signs of time. They had resisted. But resistance had its price. When they reached the top of a ridge they saw it. Their old camp. The ranger station. But it was different now. Burned out. Empty. The tents gone. The station roof collapsed. "This isn't the past," Grant said slowly. "It's a projection. A mirror of what we left behind." Theo crouched and examined the scorched ground. "It's trying to convince us we failed. That we lost everything. That there's nothing left to protect." Rourke shook his head. "Then it made a mistake." "How?" "Because it reminded us what we're fighting for." That night they lit a fire atop the ridge, visible from all directions. Ivy knew it was risky. It might draw the creature back. But she also knew this: fear grows in isolation. So they declared they were not afraid. They took turns sharing truths, real memories the entity couldn't fake. Ivy spoke of losing her sister on day 2 of the outbreak. Grant described mapping highways by foot when GPS fell. Theo admitted he'd only survived because someone he didn't know dragged him out of a burning wreck. Stories rooted them in who they were, not what the forest tried to shape. Later that night, as Ivy stood watch, something stepped into the firelight. Not a monster. A boy. Maybe 12. Thin. Pale. Quiet. Rourke raised his rifle. "Stay where you are." The boy didn't flinch. "I ran," he said simply. "I escaped from the trees." "From what?" Ivy asked, cautiously lowering her blade. "The mimic. The mind in the dark. It makes copies. It tried to use me, but I broke its rhythm." "What's your name?" Lena asked. The boy looked up, his eyes distant. "I don't remember." Grant whispered, "Another one who survived, or thinks he did." "Or another trap," Rourke said. Ivy watched him closely. His body wasn't perfect. His skin wasn't smooth like the copies. His voice was uncertain. Too uncertain to be fake? Or exactly uncertain enough to seem real? They were now at war, not just for their lives but for their minds. And in this war, the line between real and replica had begun to vanish. The boy sat silently by the fire, his face half lit by the orange flicker. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then his answers were soft, vague, like someone waking up from a dream they weren't sure they'd had. Ivy crouched beside him, careful not to make sudden movements. "What do you remember before the forest?" The boy glanced at her, but his eyes weren't vacant. They were calculating. "I remember voices. Not words. Just noise. Then quiet. Then running. That's all." Grant stood a few feet away, whispering to Rourke. "We have no way of knowing if he's real. Or if we still are," Rourke murmured back. "This place, it's been in our heads for too long." Theo was watching the boy closely, a flashlight lens aimed downward, his recorder running quietly. "There's no duplication pattern I can detect. No vocal mimicry like before. He is one of the copies, he's different. Unfinished, maybe. Or evolving," Ivy said grimly. Lena paced nearby. "What if he's a lure? What if they sent him? Pretend innocence to study how we react?" Ivy met her gaze. "Or what if he's what we'll all become if we stay here too long, half aware, half lost?" The boy looked up, then startling them. "You're asking the wrong questions." Ivy stiffened. "Then what's the right one?" The boy didn't blink. "Which one of you was copied and replaced without knowing?" The fire popped. No one spoke. Lena stepped back, hand inching toward her weapon. "That's not possible." But Theo looked pale. "Unless the process doesn't happen all at once. What if it begins, subtly? Thoughts first. Then voice. Then actions." Grant clutched his journal tighter. "That would mean any one of us. Could be already compromised," the boy finished matter of fact. Rourke raised his rifle, eyes moving from face to face. No. I don't care what that thing is trying to do, we don't turn on each other. That's the last line it wants us to cross. The boy leaned forward, eyes intense. You already have. You just don't remember it. Then, like fog lifting, he stood and walked into the trees. No one stopped him. Not out of fear, but out of a horrible realization. He might have just told the truth. The next morning, Ivy was gone. Her sleeping bag empty. Her knife left behind. Lena found a trail, bare footprints in the mud leading northeast, deeper into the forest. No sign of a struggle. No blood. Just absence. Theo was the first to speak. She didn't go alone. Ivy wouldn't leave without saying something. Grant flipped through his maps. Unless she was called. The boy said she might have already been copied. Maybe they didn't take her. Maybe they just finished. Rourke's voice was hard. No. She's out there. We find her. They followed the trail in silence. But with every step, suspicion followed them. Glances lingered too long. Words were measured. The bond they had built through survival was now brittle. Midday they reached a pond, silent, still, and mirror-like. At the far edge stood Ivy. She didn't wave. Didn't speak. She simply stood, barefoot, her back to them, staring into the water. Rourke called out. Ivy. She turned slowly. Same face. Same stance. But her eyes. Dead. Reflective. Like polished glass. She opened her mouth. And every voice in the group, Rourke, Theo, Lena, Grant, all their voices echoed out at once from her lips. You've already forgotten. You've already chosen. Then she stepped into the pond and vanished beneath the surface. Gone. Lena screamed and ran to the edge, but the water was still. Grant dropped to his knees, breath ragged. That wasn't Ivy. That was a warning. A message. Theo looked sick. They can wear our faces. Speak in our voices. That wasn't just a copy. That was a reflection. Rourke clenched his fists. Then maybe it's time we stop running? If it wants to erase us, then we leave something behind that can't be copied. Something permanent. Grant looked at him, confused. Like what? A memory it can't fake. A place it can't rewrite. He reached into his pack, pulling out a flare. We light a signal. Something real. Something human. Let it come. Let it see that no matter what it mimics, it can't be us. That night, atop the same ridge, they set fire to a massive wooden X. Smoke rose high. The forest didn't respond. But something was coming. They could feel it, moving through the trees. Slow. Confident. Ivy's voice echoed again from the dark, but this time it was laced with static and distortion. You're not survivors. Your pages, being rewritten. Rourke stepped forward, his voice clear. Then let this chapter burn. The fire burned all night. Smoke climbed into the sky like a challenge, a flare against the silence. The forest didn't react at first. No figures in the trees. No whispers. Just the soft, steady crackle of the flames licking the makeshift X. But by dawn they heard it. A low, thrumming sound. Subtle at first, like the distant beat of wings, or a heartbeat buried beneath the soil. Theo pressed his ear to the ground. It's beneath us. Moving. Grant was pacing now, his journal clutched in one hand, a flare in the other. Whatever this thing is, whatever's running this zone, it's reacting now. We've crossed a line. Rourke stood calmly watching the woods. Good. Let it come. We've been running long enough. Lena looked toward the tree line. It doesn't care about the fire, Rourke? Not really. It cares that we're remembering. That we're rejecting its version of reality. We're not just remembering, Rourke replied. We're writing. Theo nodded. We've been passengers. Now we're pushing back. The humming grew stronger. Trees began to shift, not sway but move. Roots slithered through the soil, dragging trunks sideways. A path began to open in the forest. A path they hadn't chosen. Rourke looked at the others. This is it. The center. It's bringing us in. Or trying to. No, Ivy's voice echoed again from everywhere. From inside them. You're not entering. You're already there. That's when Lena saw it. The ridge they stood on, the trees, even the fire, it was identical to the same moment they'd experienced before. Grant spun, looking at the map in his journal. I redrew this last night, after we lit the fire. But the marks are fading. The ink is gone. Theo stared down at his gear. His recordings all wiped. His flashlight, dead. Their last defenses were being peeled away. The zone wasn't just reacting. It was rewinding. Erasing. We leave a mark, Rourke said, his voice hard. A real one. He pulled the flare cap and ignited it, hurling it into the woods beyond the false ridge. The ground shook. Then the forest screamed. Not a human scream. Not a beast's. It was as if 1,000 voices cried out in recognition. They had been noticed. Trees tore from the soil. Roots became limbs. Shapes poured from the earth, some wearing faces of the dead, some wearing faces of the living. They rushed toward the survivors, not running, but drifting, like puppets on invisible strings. But the 5 stood their ground. Rourke threw a second flare, lighting a second ridge. "You want memory?" he shouted. "Here's one you can't steal." He turned to Grant. "The journal." Grant hesitated. "Do it," Ivy's voice echoed again, soft this time. Grant knelt and opened his journal on a flat rock. He pulled a knife and sliced a line into his own palm, pressing it to the page. Ink can be erased. Blood cannot. Theo ripped a piece of his shirt and began writing names across it with charcoal. Harper. Blake. Here. Ivy. Lena added hers. The boy. The girl in the truck. The old couple in the tunnel. They each wrote what they remembered, truths the mimic could never fabricate. Stories that didn't fit the entity's pattern. And then they buried the journal beneath the fire pit, sealing it under scorched rock. "Even if it takes us," Rourke said, "it won't take this." The creatures closed in now, circling. Not rushing. Studying. Ivy's copy stepped from the trees, eyes hollow. "You can't win. You're too few." "We don't need numbers," Lena snapped. "We need purpose." The mimic reached toward them, dozens of hands stretched forward. And then the ridge began to crack. The earth beneath them split open, not violently, but deliberately. Like a mouth. A tunnel formed beneath their feet. "Run," Rourke said. They didn't argue. They jumped. They fell for seconds, or hours. Time lost meaning. When they awoke, the sky was blue. Real sky. With clouds. With wind. Birdsong returned. The 5 of them stood on a highway overpass covered in ivy and ash, sunlight hitting their faces for the first time in what felt like years. Lena dropped to her knees. "We're out." Theo stared at his recorder. Back online. The signal came through. "If anyone can hear this, safe zone Delta 9 is active." Repeat, Delta 9 is active. Northeast coordinates 21.070. Hope. Real hope. They looked behind them. The forest was gone. Not burned. Just, no longer there. As if it had closed. Or moved on. Rourke faced the road ahead. "No roads left," he muttered, half smiling. Grant joined him. "Then we make our own." And the 5 survivors walked east, leaving behind the place that tried to erase them, and carrying with them the one thing it never understood. Memory is more than data. It's truth. And truth cannot be copied. End of story. No roads left. 100 survivors navigate the last safe dead zone on Earth. Zombies audiobook.